They say no one ever really escapes their mistakes. But Eastern Oregon comes pretty damn close. That corner of the state where the pines go on forever and cell service doesn't. Where the sky is too big, too blue, and too empty to lie to. And where a man like me, broke and divorced and nursing the kind of failure that rots from the inside out, can vanish for a while. My name's Caleb Dunn. I used to be a novelist, published 2 books in my 30s. One of them got some buzz, and for a moment I thought I'd made it, thought I was different, thought the stories would keep flowing, that the marriage would hold, and that the world had a seat at the table for men like me. Turns out, the world doesn't care. The buzz dried up, the writing got harder, and my wife, ex-wife, stopped pretending to believe in any of it, and honestly, I can't blame her. I barely believed in it myself, so there I was, a seasonal fire lookout on a high ridge in the Blue Mountains, not far from the Umatilla National Forest. The tower stood like a relic of another era. Wooden frame, narrow stairs, square cabin perched on a platform about 25 feet off the ground. No running water, no Wi-Fi, no one for miles in any direction. Just a crackling radio and a high-powered spotting scope bolted to the railing. It was early September, the kind of day that pretends to still be summer until the wind cuts through your coat and reminds you otherwise. I had just finished my afternoon round of notes, wind direction, visibility, temperature readings, and was sipping lukewarm coffee from a dented steel mug. I spent a lot of time with that scope, not because there was much to see, but because I didn't know what else to do with my hands anymore. Writing felt like a dead thing inside me. Most days the view was the same. Endless ridgelines, jagged treetops, a dirt road snaking through the forest below. Deer sometimes. Elk, if you were lucky. One time I watched a bobcat stalk a rabbit for over half an hour. But that afternoon, the stillness broke. As my scope ventured over the forest below, movement caught my eye in a small clearing. Sharp, erratic, fast. At first, I assumed it was a coyote. But as I adjusted the scope and the scene came into focus, my breath caught in my throat. Wolves. Not just 1 or 2, but an entire pack of them. At least 8 strong, tearing into something on the ground, maybe 400 yards out. I had never seen a wolf in my life, and now here they were in numbers, snarling and feasting. I was captivated, frozen. I couldn't tear my eyes away. Some large animal lay dead. An elk, I guessed. The wolves buried their snouts deep into the open cavity of the carcass, tearing out strips of meat with wet snarls, and every so often, one would snap or growl at another that got too close. It wasn't play, and it wasn't posturing. There was a clear order to things, but even within that order, tension simmered just beneath the surface. Watching them, I was struck by how wrong I'd been about wolves. These weren't majestic wilderness mascots or storybook animals. They were predators, real ones, fast, efficient, and unapologetically brutal. I could see the muscles flex under the fur, ears twitching in every direction, eyes sharp and constantly scanning. Whatever warmth people assigned to them, documentaries or t-shirts, had no place here. These were killers, and they were beautiful in the most terrifying way possible. Then everything changed. All of a sudden, the wolves paused mid-feast, every single head raising and turning toward the same direction. One of them, a smaller one, bolted instantly, tail tucked, disappearing into the forest without a second glance. The others held fast but bristled, visibly tense and confused. For a split second, everything in the clearing was perfectly still, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. And then I saw it. There was movement in the underbrush at the edge of the clearing, subtle at first, but clearly visible through the scope. At first, I thought it might be another wolf moving through the trees, maybe an intruder that caught the attention of the pack. But then the branches began to tremble and part, and something massive began to emerge. The shape was indistinct, cloaked in shadow and half shielded by brush, but it was clear that whatever it was much bigger and much darker than a wolf. The huge shape pulled itself free from the tree line with slow, deliberate movements. The distance made it difficult to see details, and I had to keep adjusting the scope, struggling to bring it into sharp focus. The intruder moved a bit like a bear, but definitely wasn't one. First of all, it was taller than any black bear I'd ever seen, but also less bulky, with longer limbs that flexed wrong when it moved. It didn't run. It lurched, half upright, half on all fours, like its joints were caught between two species. As the creature moved out of the shade, I caught more details: tufts of greasy dark fur clinging in uneven patches, and a head that made my stomach twist. It was far too short and compact for any predator I was familiar with. The skull looked too wide across the top, as though the cranium had been stretched sideways. The muzzle, if you could even call it that, was thick and abruptly truncated, more like the front of a swollen face than a functional snout. It looked different than those of the wolves. The comparatively short jaws looked powerful, as if they were meant for crushing bone. Things got even weirder as my gaze traveled over the creature's body. It walked on all fours, but had a torso that looked grotesquely human from the shoulders down, broad, heaving, with visible musculature that was all wrong. Its chest rose and fell like a powerlifter in mid-set, thick slabs of muscle shifting under slick, matted fur. I could make out deep striations across the shoulders and pectorals, as well as something that almost resembled a six-pack, distorted by bulk and posture. The longer I looked, the more it unsettled me. The proportions weren't just strong, they were obscene, exaggerated, like someone had sculpted a human frame but gave up on symmetry halfway through. For a wild second, I thought maybe it was a man in some kind of costume, some local nut with a death wish and a mask. But no costume moved like that. No prosthetics flexed or tensed with such primal, organic intent. I couldn't make sense of this thing. It looked like a cross between a gorilla and a hyena, combining long, powerful forelimbs with bone-crushing jaws, shoulders hunched high. Every now and then it lifted itself up on two legs, looked around, and sniffed the air. Seeing this thing standing upright, something surfaced from memory. A half-forgotten article I'd read years ago on a conspiracy blog. It was about Dogman sightings, supposed bipedal creatures, merging features of both man and beast. People seemed to encounter these things all over the country. At the time, I'd laughed it off as internet folklore, the kind of cryptid campfire story that keeps bored minds busy. But then, staring through my scope at this impossible thing, I wasn't laughing. This creature bore some resemblance to those descriptions, sure, but it was also far more grotesque, more misshapen, more primitive. Those stories described something sleek, fast, clever, a shadow in the trees. What I was looking at felt wrong, diseased, like the stories had gotten the blueprint right, but reality had corrupted it into something much more horrifying. Still, it was the best explanation I had at that moment. The creature approached the carcass slowly, with a deliberate, unsettling calm. Its wide head swiveled side to side, scanning its surroundings as it assessed the situation. It moved like it expected the wolves to scatter. The size difference was striking. The creature, even hunched and moving on all fours, loomed over the wolves. It was nearly twice their height at the shoulder, and probably outweighed them by several hundred pounds. Standing among them, it looked like a beast from another age, a grotesque relic of something ancient and wrong, facing off against modern predators who didn't seem the least bit impressed. The wolves didn't flee, not even close. They stood their ground, pulling away from the carcass and forming up with uncanny precision. Their hackles rose in unison, a wall of bristling gray fur and bared teeth. They were preparing for a fight. As it drew closer to the wolves, the Dogman began to rear up on its hind legs, trying to make itself look bigger. On two legs, even hunched, it had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. Every time it rose, it flung its arms wide, swiping the air with those impossibly long limbs, trying to intimidate the wolves. It was a grotesque display. The wolves didn't budge. Instead, they began to spread out, moving with eerie synchronicity, like trained fighters slipping into their designated positions. A few of them veered left, another few right, encircling the Dogman. They were surrounding the thing, leveraging their numerical advantage. Watching from the safety of my platform high above the ground, I could feel the tension radiating off the scene, the sense that violence was moments away, as inevitable as gravity. Then it began. One of the wolves recklessly broke formation and lunged toward the dogman with a burst of speed. It leapt high, aiming for the creature's throat, but the thing was ready. One of its long, unnervingly human arms lashed out, and what looked like a massive clawed hand caught the wolf mid-air. The dogman slammed the wolf into the ground with brutal force. The impact was so violent it made me flinch. Dust exploded, and the wolf went limp instantly. The dogman didn't just drop the body, it flung it. With a roar that carried all the way up the ridge, it hurled the lifeless wolf at another member of the pack. The corpse struck the second wolf, causing it to scramble back momentarily. It wasn't just violence. It was fury, raw and theatrical, like a toddler throwing a toy in a tantrum. Then the wolves began their attack in earnest. The remaining 7 wolves had the dogman surrounded and moved in from all sides. They fought like a single unit. One would charge in from the front, jaws snapping, drawing the creature's focus and triggering a wild, clumsy swipe. At that same moment, another would dart in from the side to sink its teeth into an ankle or thigh, then peel away before the dogman could retaliate. Each wolf timed its movements with surgical precision, exploiting every distraction and opening. They attacked from multiple directions, front, flank, and rear, sometimes with 2 or even 3 wolves lunging in perfect synchronicity. It was relentless. The dogman twisted and flailed, trying to keep up, but its long arms were better suited for intimidation than actual defense. It swung wide, overcommitted, often spinning itself off balance. It hit the ground more than once, driven into a frenzy by the chaos around it. Still, it fought back with terrifying strength, sending bursts of dirt skyward with each miss. But the wolves adapted. They moved lower, faster, and more fluidly. Their rhythm was primal and beautiful, like watching an ancient war dance play out in the dirt and blood. The creature was strong, but strength wasn't enough. It was reacting, always reacting, while the wolves dictated and controlled the engagement. The dogman didn't fight with technique. It fought with rage. Then one of the wolves made the mistake of holding on to its leg for a second too long. The dogman seized the opportunity. With shocking speed, it twisted its upper body, reached down, and grabbed the wolf by the scruff of the neck with one hand. It lifted the struggling animal off the ground like it weighed nothing and pulled it close to its face. Its short, thick jaws opened wide and clamped down on the wolf's shoulder. Even from my vantage point, I could see the creature's entire frame tighten as it bit down hard. The wolf kicked wildly, then twitched as it died in the creature's grip. Without hesitation, the dogman swung around and slammed the body down on another wolf that was charging in from the side. The corpse struck the second wolf mid-sprint, knocking it down into the dirt. But the creature wasn't done with it. It pounced on the stunned animal, pinned its head down with one hand, and raised the other like a club. It brought its clawed fist down once, twice, bone-jarring blows that made the wolf writhe beneath it. 3 of the wolves were down, but the momentary distraction gave the remaining 5 an opening. One of them launched an attack from behind, a blur of gray fur, and jumped squarely on the dogman's back. The wolf's jaws clamped down somewhere around its neck. Even from this distance, I could see the thing thrash and hear its pain-filled screeches as it spun in a wide arc, clawing at the air behind it, trying to get a hold of the wolf. The wolf held on, riding the beast like a maddened bull. Another wolf charged in from the creature's right and tore into its flank, while it was focused on the one on its back. The other wolves recognized their chance and also barged in, biting down on whatever they could get a hold of. For a few heartbeats, the tide of the fight looked like it had truly turned in their favor, but it didn't last. With all 5 wolves now latched onto it, the dogman suddenly had a much easier time getting a hold of them. Foolishly giving away their advantage of speed, they were close, committed, and within reach. The creature turned its attention away from the wolf on its back and instead grabbed another one by its hind leg. It lifted the struggling animal overhead like a sack of meat and sank its mighty jaws into the wolf's belly. Without pausing, the dogman hurled the broken body across the clearing, then grabbed another wolf, peeling it off its flank. It bit down on the wolf's spine and pulled at the same time, almost ripping the poor animal apart entirely. The fact that one of the wolves still had its teeth buried in the dogman's neck this entire time didn't seem to bother it one bit. It spun around and found the next wolf. This one still latched onto its left ankle, pulling and thrashing. The dogman raised its arm high and brought its fist down like a sledgehammer on the wolf's spine. The impact was horrifying, brutal, and final. The wolf's body jerked violently, legs splaying out, and then went limp, its bite releasing as if a switch had been flipped. The creature struck again for good measure, pounding the shattered carcass once more into the dirt, before casting it aside like garbage. It was systematic, almost mechanical. One by one, the strange creature dismantled the pack. The dogman then threw itself to the ground with force, rolling around in an attempt to finally dislodge the wolf, still holding onto its neck. The move worked. The wolf quickly lost its grip and was flung free, tumbling across the ground in a blur of fur and dust. Before it could regain its footing, the dogman lunged, trying to snatch it with one of its hands, but the wolf scrambled away just in time, its paws quickly finding traction on the dry earth. It disappeared into the trees, limping but alive. Now unburdened, the dogman rose and turned its attention on the one remaining wolf, the skittish one that had bolted initially when the dogman had first shown up. It had come back and joined its pack in the hit-and-run attack, but never latched onto the creature like its more aggressive pack members had. The wolf stood frozen for a second, visibly unsure whether to flee or continue the fight. The dogman took one heavy step toward it, and that was all it took. The wolf turned and ran, tail between its legs, disappearing into the tree line after its fellow survivor. The clearing had turned into a killing ground, the dead elk now surrounded by 6 dead wolves, mangled to varying degrees. The dogman stood among them, wounded, panting heavily, its huge frame rising and falling with each labored breath. I could see its injuries, deep punctures along its flanks, its arms scored with bite marks. One ear looked partially shredded, and its dark fur was streaked with long, wet, glossy red trails. The thing moved more slowly now, limping slightly, but it was still terrifying. It lowered its head and sniffed one of the corpses, nosing at the torn fur and blood-soaked earth. Then another. It moved from body to body, not with grief or hesitation, but as if it were studying the wolves. It didn't feed on any of the dead wolves. After spending a couple of minutes inspecting them, it limped toward the elk carcass and began feeding. I watched through the scope, barely blinking, as it crouched beside the elk and drove one of its hands deep into the torn open body cavity. It pulled out a strip of meat and brought it up to its mouth, just like a man would. The way it used its hands, the precision of its grip, the casual way it fed, it was deeply, viscerally wrong. Not like an animal, not like anything I'd ever seen in nature. It tore another chunk free and another, shoving them into its mouth with mechanical efficiency, chewing steadily as blood soaked into the fur around its jaws. Then something shifted. The creature paused mid-chew and slowly raised its head, eyes scanning the tree line and the ridges beyond. Its nostrils flared as it sniffed the air, and its ears twitched once. It turned its head slightly, and then looked right at me. For a second, I froze, unsure if I was imagining it, but the way its jaw went still, the way it stopped chewing altogether, told me that its attention had shifted completely. Despite the distance, it had clearly noticed me. The blood-smeared strip of elk hung limply from its hand as its eyes stared straight up the ridge. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then its lip curled slightly, revealing a row of thick, jagged teeth. It didn't growl or snarl. It didn't need to. That slight curl, that glint in its eye, said enough. It knew I was there. I stayed frozen behind the scope, too afraid to move, too afraid to even blink. For a long minute, it didn't break eye contact. Then, slowly, It lifted the strip of meat to its mouth again and resumed feeding, its gaze lingering on my position for several more seconds before turning back to the carcass. Eventually, after another 10 minutes or so, it gripped the elk carcass by a hind leg with one hand and began dragging it toward the underbrush. I watched it disappear into the trees. Only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding for God knows how long. I backed away from the scope and quickly retreated inside the tower cabin, my entire body shaking. I couldn't stay there, not with that thing out there. Whatever it was, it had seen me and knew where I was. I began packing immediately, shoving my notebook and clothes into my duffel bag. My truck was parked a few hundred feet down the hill, tucked beside a ranger access trail, but I couldn't bring myself to make that walk with dusk already falling. Not with that thing still in the vicinity, so I decided to stay put. That night, I barely slept. I sat on the floor in the far corner of the cabin, gripping the bear spray with white knuckles and jumping at every creak of the wood. More than once I thought I heard something downstairs, a low, guttural moaning, followed by a soft, almost inquisitive growl. Each sound rose through the floorboards like a phantom heartbeat, far too close and far too real. My body locked up with every creak of the structure. The noises would come in waves, sometimes a scraping, sometimes a dull thud. I imagined it down there, circling the base of the tower, sniffing, listening, waiting. Maybe it was looking for me, unable to comprehend that I was hiding inside the structure above its head. I didn't dare move, didn't dare to go out onto the platform to take a look. I just sat there in the dark, bear spray in hand, counting down the hours until dawn. By morning, the sky was pale and quiet. I grabbed my duffel and decided to make a run for the truck. The moment I stepped outside, I knew something had been there. Some of the clothes I'd left out to dry were missing from the line, ripped loose and left scattered on the ground. One flannel shirt lay shredded on the ground, smeared with blood, and around the base of the tower, in the soft dirt, were huge prints. They looked vaguely human, except for the massive claw marks. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I ran to the truck, climbed in, started the engine, and drove down the narrow road a lot faster than I ever had before. To this day, I can't stop thinking about that thing, about the way it looked at me, as if it was weighing a decision. There was no wild animal confusion in those eyes, just awareness, intent. I am certain that if I had moved that night, made a sound, or done anything to spark its curiosity, I would have died up there in that tower, torn apart like the wolves and dragged off like the elk, maybe never found. But one good thing came out of that night. For reasons I still don't fully understand, I've been able to write again. Horror instead of the generic romance crap I'd failed at before. The words started pouring out of me the moment I got back to the city. I hammered out a full manuscript for a Dogman novel in a week, then another the week after. I've written more in the past month than I have in the last 5 years. It seems that I've finally found my purpose.